What I'm about to share still unsettles me, because I've never been able to explain it, and no one I know has either. I was working late nights at a small bar about half an hour from my home. Jobs in rural areas aren't easy to come by. So even though it wasn't glamorous work, I stuck with it. Most nights were uneventful. That night started the same way. I close up the lanterns, rest every night at 1:40 a.m. on the dot. If you ask the regulars, they'll tell you it used to be called the Rusty Anchor, and before that, May's Tap. Names peel off this place like old paint. The bar sits where asphalt gives up and the county road turns to hard-packed dirt for farms. Beyond that is hollow pines, miles of brambled hedgerows and black needle trees that knot together above the road so tight they turn headlights into a dim suit. I've driven those curves for years. I can picture the cat's-eyes reflectors in my sleep. I can count the bends by memory like beads on a rosary. Most nights, the drive home is the best thing that happens to me. 28 minutes of nobody talking, nobody spilling, nobody asking for one more round 5 minutes after last call. The night everything went wrong started like hundreds of others. Wiping a counter sticky with rye, stacking clean pint glasses, the whir of the cooler in the back room, and the orange-red glow of the beer sign shivering on the window. A guy named Pete who tips in quarters told me a story about an owl that lifted his chihuahua. Denise, the graveyard nurse, argued that it must have been a hawk. I laughed because that's what bartenders do for tips. We collect weird stories and pass them on with interest. If I'm honest, I like that part. People are catalogs. They come in dog-eared and leave with fresh creases. But I like the silence more. By the time I yanked down the metal gate and twisted the key, the road smelled like rain. Even though the sky was bare, an empty bowl of winter black. You know those nights when the air itself feels supercharged, when a storm is stalking you from somewhere you can't see. It was one of those. My hands were steady. They always are. You don't carry 6 pint glasses in one hand with a tremor. You don't rack billiard balls with a tremor. You don't count the drawer with a tremor. Steady is the first thing I learned in this job. Steady and quiet. It's a survival trait. I reversed out, pulled onto Larch Route, and felt the tires catch gravel. The radio hummed something from the 90s. I killed it. I prefer the engine and the night. Past the burned silo, the road narrows. Past the Miller place, where that dog used to chase my hubcaps. The pavement goes scarred and pitted. Then you hit the stretch I call the tunnel, because the pines on either side knit into a vault. Even in summer, it feels refrigerated there. Even in summer, you drive through your own breath. Fog lives in hollow pines, but not like that night. It was waiting, belly down across the road. Thick, white, hungry. I've seen fog roll and lift and swirl, but this was more like the road had swallowed a cloud, and my car was a spoon. The high beams made things worse. A flat wall of light that bounced back at me, turning the world to milk glass. I eased off the gas and leaned forward, chin almost on the wheel, like getting my face closer to the glass, which squeezed more distance out of headlamps. The first thing that struck me, harder than the fog, was the quiet. Different quiet. My grandma used to say, the kind you can set a watch by. No crickets. No distant trains. Not even the soft metallic tick of the cooling engine when I stopped at the first bend to get my bearings. Just the hiss of tires on damp asphalt in my breath. A little too loud in the cabin. The roadside markers, short white posts with reflective panels, usually leap toward you and skid past like fish. That night, they appeared out of nowhere, ghosted by and vanished. It made the road feel shorter and longer at the same time, like I was looping one bright patch of the world over and over. Then I saw it. A yellow light, low in the trees to my right, maybe 50 feet off the road, or maybe 10, or maybe 100. Fog each depth. It blinked. Not fast, not random. It pulsed, on off. A metronome, a heartbeat. The first thought that came to me was practical, some farmer's hazard beacon. The second was the warning light they put on construction rigs. The third was less a thought than an unease that ran cables through my nerves and tightened them to a single frequency. Wrong. I have this habit of narrating to myself when I get spooked, like calling a game. Okay, I said out loud. Marker. Could be a marker. The sound of my voice surprised me. It was too present in the small space, too human against all that blank. I kept driving. The light kept pace. If I sped up, it seemed to rise and grow faint. If I slowed, it swelled. It never closed the distance, but it didn't fall away either. I hit the windshield wipers. Useless. I cracked the window to listen. Maybe I'd catch some clue. A generator, a hiss, tires on dirt. The air slid in, cold and smelling of sap. Nothing else. I came to the spot where the creek cuts under the road. There's a dip there. The light held level, as if the land didn't exist for it. A blink. Another. I told myself to ignore it. Eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2. The sensible thing was to keep crawling. But the human thing, the animal thing, felt put on trial. If I kept going, I would be moving under a gaze. If I stopped, I might get to look back at it and take its measure, make it small. I did the human thing. I tapped the brakes, then rolled to a cautious stop, the nose of my car aimed into a solid panel of fog. The light stopped with me. No drift, no lag. Its pulse didn't change. It simply stayed. That was the moment my breath sped up. That was when the quiet got heavier, like the air had pulled a blanket over its face. I put the car in park and watched my hands. Still steady. Okay, I said again. I clicked on the hazards. Their orange reflection in the fog was weirdly scary. Too bright, too contained, like two mouthless screams that got stuck at the glass. I waited for a car to overtake me, to give me an excuse to move. None came. After 30 seconds that felt like 5 minutes, I cracked my door. A slice of cold slid over my knees. I told myself to step out, walk to the white line, and listen. I stepped out with one shoe. The gravel clicked under my heel. The fog pushed in, curious. I put my other foot down. That was when the engine died. It wasn't a sputter. It wasn't a cough. It just cut. The headlights snapped off too. A vacuum thump of silence filled the car, the kind that is weight. For a heartbeat, the only light left in the world was the hazards, until they died too. The yellow pulse in the trees was all that remained. I stood in the open door, half in the car, half out, suddenly aware of how ridiculous and fragile my body was. The dark on either side felt thigh-deep. The light's pulse climbed a degree in brightness. Not faster, just stronger, as if something behind a curtain had taken one step closer. A part of me went bartender calm. I made a list. Battery failure, but the engine had cut before the lights. Alternator, but the phone in my pocket should still work. Moisture, but everything had sealed up fine in worse weather. The list felt like a child's spell. Say the right words and you won't be chosen. The rest of me, an older, smarter part, went primitive. Get back in. Close yourself up. Make the animal smaller. I folded and slammed the door and locked it. Old superstition, locks make cages. Cages make safety. I pressed the starter. The car answered with a dead click. Tried again. Nothing. I pulled my phone from my jacket. The screen slept like a polished stone. I held the button. No logo. No glow. I shook it. Another superstition. As if there were a filament I could wake by rattling. Dead. I had 20% at the bar. I checked right before I locked up. Past me had failed, present me again. Okay, I said for the third time, because words were the only tools I had left. Through the windshield, the light waxed. The fog around it went honey-colored, then white, as if it were being blown thin from behind. Something hot brushed my cheek, like the air in the cabin had exhaled against me. I put my palm a hair's breadth above the steering wheel. Heat was blooming there, not burning, not yet, just a slow, patient rise. The light pulsed brighter. The blank around me brightened, too, not evenly, but in spoonfuls that made the world look dented. I blinked and saw afterimages, electric coins that hovered when I shut my eyes. Each pulse dragged another inch of dread out of me. I thought of Denise, the nurse, telling me about postpartum women who'd sit in their cars and cry after midnight shift because the house light inside hurt their eyes. I thought of Pete's owl. I thought of the word visitation, how it sounds gentle until you read the old stories, and remember it means arrival by a power that makes your knees a problem. I don't know why I said it. It felt absurd even as it left my mouth. but fear will try any key in the lock. If you need something, say it. My breath fogged the glass. If you're a person, call out. My voice vibrated in the tiny space like plucked wire. The light went off, not faded, not nestled back in the trees. Off. The dark came crashing in so hard, I swayed as if I'd lost balance. For 2 pulses in my heart, there was nothing at all, no glow, no proof that anything had ever been there, just a night so thick it felt like velvet shoved into my mouth. Then the light came back, and it was not yellow. It was white pushed toward blue, the color of a welding torch watched through your eyelashes. It didn't blink now. It ramped. I saw movement in it. Or rather, I saw the suggestion of movement, the way you can see heat shimmer above a road, a sheathing and folding, a figure made of thicknesses of brightness. It came forward by not moving. The fog bent around it like cloth. Stop, I said, but my voice had no place to land. The thing, if it was a thing, burned brighter, and the heat in the cabin lifted oil smells up from the dash. The plastic beneath my fingertips felt tacky. I tasted metal the way you do when a cavity aches. My teeth felt notched. The wheel under my palms went from warm to hot. Not a brand yet, but headed there. Reflex took over. I curled my hands into fists and set them on my thighs. My arms trembled. I told you they never tremble. That is my one pride. The animal that lives under the bartender, under the person who wipes, smiles, says, "What can I get ya?" That animal thought, lie flat, play dead. Maybe it only loves what moves. I forced myself to look away from the light, to roll my eyes down, to study the smallness of things. The torn seam on the passenger seat, the nickel-sized stain on my jeans from spilled stout, my shoelace, with it frayed to a pale tassel. I anchored there like you hold a table edge during a tremor. The car's interior ticked and complained as if it were heating in the sun. A whisper, I swear to you, a whisper, padded along the back seat. Not a voice, not exactly. More like the idea of words, water over smooth stones, syllables rounded by time, too shaped to be random, too faint to catch. Say it again, I told the air. My mouth was dry enough that the words came out papery. The white squeezed brighter, then brighter again. A collapsing star packed into a lantern. It should have hurt. In my memory, it did. But the pain is less than the pressure, the way your chest feels when someone sits on it. My ears popped. The heat washed forward. Now it did burn. Tears came without permission. My features felt soft and ill-fitting, as if someone had pushed my face on wrong. I jammed my eyes shut and saw a bright vein sliding across my lids. And then, nothing. Not a fade. Not a quieting. A cut, like someone took scissors to film. Dark slammed back. So suddenly it was obscene, like walking into a church where the candles had just been blown out. I sat with my hands in my lap, and my jaw clenched so hard the hinge ached, waiting for the world to announce itself in some ordinary way. A car cresting the hill, the rill of the creek in its pipe under the road, the creature scrape of a raccoon in the ditch. It didn't. The fog hung. The dark hung. My breath sawed and steadied. I reached for the starter, a habit as much as a plan. The car woke on the first turn, cheerful as a pet. The battery gauge looked normal. The dash clock had reset to 12 a.m. and was flashing, like a kitchen after the power comes back. I checked my phone. It lay in my palm black as a skipping stone. I held the button one long Mississippi. No luck. I set it face up on the passenger seat, like a small body. I put the car in drive and eased my foot off the brake. The tires whispered. The fog parted and sealed behind me, a slow mouth. I went 20 miles per hour, then 25, then 30. Every dozen seconds, I looked to my right, expecting the light to pace me again. The trees held their counsel. When the fog thinned, I breathed the first time since I'd turned into the tunnel. The world returned in pieces. A fence post, a chunk of stone, the dead gray hull of the miller's silo. By the time the first porch light appeared, a weak square stitched high on a farmhouse, my hands hurt from clenching. I told myself a half dozen stories before I reached town. Generator, swamp gas, illicit hunting rig, freak atmospheric lensing. It was nothing makes a good lullaby for adults, But each story dropped through itself and left a hole. The engine cut, the hazards died, the phone, the heat, the pressure, that sense of a whisper moving very close. I need you to believe me when I say I'm not the kind to go looking for the uncanny in things. I'd rather have a dependable lie than a miracle that makes me late for work. But the lie wouldn't settle. It kept wriggling out of the blankets. I swung into my driveway too fast and kissed the curb. The house looked like any other winter house at 2:30 a.m. The kitchen dark, the living room with that dead TV blue, that electronics leak. When I stepped out, the night air smelled like the inside of a freezer that's just been defrosted. Cold and metallic. I carried the scent in with me without meaning to. It clung to my jacket. You know how you can smell electricity after a bad plug? That, only harsher, with a rim of burnt sugar that made my tongue ache. In the bathroom, I peeled off the jacket and held it to the light. No scorch marks. No brown lick on the fabric. But when I pressed my nose to the sleeve seam and breathed, there was scorched iron and something sweet enough to set your teeth on edge. I turned my hands over in the mirror. The pads looked normal. A bartender's map. Tiny nicks. The pale shine of dry winter skin. A healing cut where a chipped glass had kissed me 2 nights before. I pressed my fingers to my cheeks. They were warm. Not hot. Just carrying the echo of a heat that had been there and moved on. Sleep is where you escape having pretend to yourself. I avoided it. I poured a glass of water, stood at the sink, and stared at the black square of the window. Hollow Pines was out there, like it always is, like it's been my whole life. And for the first time it felt less like a place and more like a creature with a posture. My grandmother kept a jar of iron nails on her porch. For witches, she'd say. And even thinking that made me smile. How people hand you spells like recipes. I would have dumped 1,000 nails across my threshold, right? Then if it meant I didn't have to close my eyes and feel that heat re-enter my dreams. I left the kitchen light on and fell asleep on the couch sitting up. My neck still remembers it. Morning made everything smaller. That's its job. The sun came in pale and charitable, and for an hour I let myself be ordinary again. I took a shower. I buttered toast. I checked the car. The dash clock still blinked 12 o'clock, a little insistence. The hood was warm from the driveway sun. When I popped it, the engine smelled like itself, oil and road grit. I touched the battery leads. Cool. In the daylight, my memory of the heat, the light, and the whisper filed themselves under overreaction. The human brain will curate your horror if you give it coffee and routine. Around noon, I took my jacket back down from the hook to head out for groceries. The scorched smell wasn't smaller. It was bigger, or not bigger, closer, like it had soaked deeper into the fibers overnight. I pressed the sleeve to my face and inhaled until my eyes watered. For a second, I was back in the car. The pressure, the blue-white, the sense of something that didn't walk forward but nevertheless arrived. My legs went soft enough that I had to sit down. I laughed at myself, which is what you do when you need to stay on your own side. At 3, I drove back to the bar for the evening shift. The road through Hollow Pines was ordinary as bread. 2 delivery trucks, a school bus, a dog that did not chase my hubcaps. I almost texted Denise to say, "You ever seen fog so thick it kills things?" But the question looked insane on the screen, so I erased it and sent a picture of the new IPA tap instead. I told myself if the thing, the light, wanted me, it would have taken me when I sat there like a specimen under glass. This is a comforting lie. It kept me through the shift. Late that night, after the last pitcher was rinsed and the register tucked into its drawer, Pete leaned on the bar and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth and found the story was too long, too thin, and too easy to make into a joke. "Fog," I said. "White stuff. Thick." "Ah," he said, serious as a priest. "That's not fog, friend. That's Hollow Pines telling you it still remembers your name." It should have been a laugh. He wasn't drunk enough for it to be a joke. I changed the subject to football and added up his quarters. For a week, nothing strange happened when I drove home. The tunnel was only a tunnel. The cat's eyes winked in predictable rhythms. The quiet was only the quiet I knew. And then, on a Wednesday, a new brand of rawness arrived. Not theatrical, not blue-white. It was smaller and nastier, the way a hangnail is smaller but harder to ignore than a bruise. The radio went to static right as I passed the burned silo. Not a blast of white noise, the kind of static that sounds like whispering if you squint. I smacked the console. The static stopped. The road curved. The static returned. I turned the radio off. The noise continued. A soft, threadbare sound in the air, coming from nowhere inside the car. When the road straightened, the noise died like a killed light. I told myself it was interference from some ham set up on the Miller place. Except the Miller place has been empty since before I learned to drive. The next night, rain. Real rain. Honest weather. It came in sheets and slicked the road to a ribbon. The wipers worked hard enough to squeak. When I reached the dip where the creek runs, the headlights threw their light across water and a shape moved there. Something standing up in a shallow run. Too tall for a coyote, too still for a person. Just 2 long seconds, and then the fog of rain swallowed it. I told myself deer. I told myself scarecrow falling off a fence. I told myself nothing and kept my speed steady. But the second I cleared the tunnel, I smelled it again, violently. Scorched iron in the breath of hot plastic. It was in my car without a source, as if a small factory had been operating under the passenger seat. When I crossed the county line, the smell popped like a bubble. My hands hurt again. I hadn't realized I had made fists. I tell you all that so you won't think I'm putting more mystery into the story than it deserves. Maybe the world is just strange in handfuls, and I happen to put both hands in at once. Maybe the light that night was nothing, and the smells and the static after were my nerves playing fetch with themselves. I tried to live in that maybe. I did okay, until the day I found the mark. I was balancing a tray of 6 empty glasses in the back room when one slid and nicked my palm. Just a silverfish thin cut, but it bled. I went to the sink, washed, and reached for the first aid kit. When I unrolled the gauze and turned my hand under the light, I saw it. The cut ran across the pad at the base of my thumb, right where a man's lifeline sits if you believe the people who read palms. There, paler than the rest of my skin, was a shallow crescent I'd never noticed before. Not a scar. Not quite. I pressed it, and the heat of that car, the weight of that light, flew up my arm like a memory goes when it's too fast to stop. I stood with my hand over the stainless sink and waited for the feeling to pass. It did. You can't live at that pitch. I taped the cut and poured drinks and told myself a new lie. People find new marks on their bodies all the time. That night, closing the bar, I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. I pocketed a handful of the long iron nails we used to fix the stools, slid them into my jacket, and told myself it was because I'd been meaning to fix my back fence. When I reached the car, I tucked one nail into the cup holder, one under the floor mat, one in the glove compartment like I was salting a roast. Laugh if you want. People who haven't been afraid are good at laughing. People who will understand how the mind likes handles. And iron is a handle if you grew up with certain stories. And I did. The fog didn't come that night. The light didn't come either. The road gave me back to myself. And when I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the dark with the engine off and the keys still in the ignition and waited to feel stupid. Instead, I felt watchful, the way you do when a storm front is near. The kitchen window had the same dead blue glow. The house was only a house. I got out, closed the car door soft, and in the blank between the thumb and the world settling, a small, neat blink touched the corner of my eye. The porch light across the street, the one that had burned steady since last summer, winked once. Off, on, in a rhythm my body knew before my brain did. On, off. Not fast, not slow. The metronome. I stood under my own porchie with rain beads caught in the hair at my temple, and for a second the smell came up again, sharp and familiar. A plug pulled too quick from a wall, a thin string of sweetness braided through iron. I unlocked my door. I went inside. I put the nails in a bowl on the kitchen table because I am stubborn, and because superstition is still a superstition if you do it stubbornly. I slept in my bed. I dreamed of nothing that I can remember. Morning came like it always does. I made coffee. I held my jacket to my face and inhaled and told myself it smelled like nothing. But sometimes when the fog leans its weight across hollow pines and the cat's eyes on a road pop into existence one by one like eyes opening in a close dark, my palms warm against the steering wheel in that exact same careful, patient way, and I hear a soft thread of whispering like static that isn't static say something shaped like my name. On those nights, I keep my speed steady. I do not stop. I do not speed up. I imagine a metronome in the trees, keeping pace the way a heart keeps time for a body. And I picture that first heat building somewhere I cannot see, and I think, it let me go once, or it marked me for later.